You believe you know the face of a hero, but history often hides a visage of the monster behind the metal. Did this Marshal of France really change the definition of nobility forever? For centuries, one man's pursuit of forbidden power changed the definition of nobility forever, casting a profound shadow over medieval Europe. He carried the sacred oil for the king's coronation, yet within his private chambers he pursued rituals of profound violation, asking, what happens when limitless wealth and martial glory merge with an unquenchable, esoteric hunger? The answer lies in the tragic ruin of a Marshal of France, where the silence of the fortified castle walls was not sanctuary, it was a vault, keeping safe the whispers of condemned youth. In the fractured realm of 15th century France, amidst the echoing thunder of the 100 Years' War, a figure of staggering duality emerged, Gilles de Rais. How did the co-commander to the legendary Joan of Arc fall so far? Hailed as a lion of chivalry, his family lineage was steeped in wealth and martial honor. He was a cornerstone of the monarchy, even entrusted with carrying the holy ampulla at the coronation of King Charles VII. Yet, history warns us that the foundations of great power are often built upon a fragile human spirit. You must understand the scale of his prestige to comprehend the depth of his subsequent fall, because the light of his public life only made the shadows of his private existence darker. Born in 1405, Gilles inherited vast estates, castles, and a fortune that placed him among the wealthiest men in the kingdom. But how did this immense affluence become a catalyst for catastrophe? Secured early by strategic marriages, this wealth was not a comfort, but a curse, especially after the loss of his parents forced him under the tutelage of his ambitious grandfather, Jean de Rais, who taught the young noble to view resources and people as mere levers of power. This conditioning instilled a dangerous belief in personal invincibility, suggesting that laws and morals applied to others, but not to the Montmorency-Laval line. And this unchecked power was the first crucial ingredient in the coming catastrophe. His early adulthood was defined by extraordinary military valor, making him a symbol of hope. But can war truly erode the boundaries of a hero's conscience? You see him on the battlefields of Orleans, fighting alongside Joan of Arc, an alliance that was both historical and deeply spiritual, momentarily lifting France from despair. The title, Marshal of France, was his earned glory, cementing his status as an indispensable hero. But the turmoil of war, the constant proximity to death, and the exercise of brutal authority may have subtly eroded the boundaries of his conscience, shifting the concept of control from the battlefield to the private domain. Following the military victories, particularly after Joan's tragic end, Gilles' focus shifted dramatically, asking the French nobility, how much is too much when it comes to medieval luxury? The lavishness of his lifestyle became legendary, a spectacle of excess that stunned even the indulgent French nobility. His castles, Tiffauges, Castle, and others, became theaters for extravagant productions, where hundreds of actors performed religious mysteries, while enormous sums were spent on costumes, banquets, and a massive retinue. This profligate spending, however, was unsustainable. His wealth, once boundless, began to rapidly dissipate, creating a void that no mere entertainment could fill. As the financial ruin accelerated, the Marshal sought radical solutions, asking, can forbidden magic truly solve your debt crisis? He turned not to frugality, but to the clandestine arts, alchemy, and the forbidden craft of esoteric summoning. The medieval mind often sought supernatural intervention where human effort failed, believing gold could be conjured or power secured through dark pacts. You can almost feel the damp, secluded air of his private chambers, lit only by flickering lamps and the glint of strange metals. This descent into the occult was a profound step away from the Christian chivalry he publicly embodied. The turning point in this darkening journey was the arrival of Francesco Prelati, an Italian cleric claiming arcane knowledge. Was he an opportunist or the architect of a hero's ruin? Prelati was the conduit, promising Gilles the secrets of the philosopher's stone and the ability to summon infernal entities to secure wealth and retribution. Gilles' hunger for power and control found an immediate partner in this shadowy figure. But it is critical to recognize this. The rituals were not merely about fortune, they were about achieving a dominion that transcended the limitations of mortal authority, compensating for the gradual collapse of his material influence. The shift in his focus necessitated ritual components, and as the traditional ingredients failed to yield gold, the ceremonies grew more desperate and chilling, revealing the dark secret of the Marshal's forbidden quest. Whispers began to circulate in the surrounding villages of Brittany, rumors of sudden, inexplicable disappearances, especially among the youth. These victims, often boys from impoverished families, were lured to the Marshal's fortresses with promises of apprenticeship or wealth. But this wasn't the end. It was the terrible beginning. Imagine for a moment the deep silence that falls over the stone keep after the sun sets. Can these castle walls tell the true story of Europe's first aristocratic monster? You are within the heavy walls of Tiffauges, where the grandeur of the hall masks the chilling truth of the lower levels. The air is thick, stale, and carries the faint metallic scent of iron and desperation. What unfolded in these hidden rooms, chambers dedicated to the unholy rituals of the sanctum regnum, defied all societal and moral constraints. It was here that the knight's honor was systematically shed, replaced by a terrible, calculated cruelty enacted under the guise of magical necessity. The narrative focus narrows now onto the ritualistic nature of his crimes, revealing what terrible sacrifice did the hero of France make in pursuit of eternal power. The acts committed were severe violations of dignity and life, fueled by the Marshal's belief that these sacrifices were necessary to appease the invoked entities and secure the promised gold and knowledge. The historical accounts suggest a pattern of calculated, terrifying episodes where victims were subjected to prolonged suffering before their tragic end. This was the dark climax of his esoteric pursuit, the terrifying conflation of unholy ritual and extreme personal violation. For a long time, the sheer power and aristocratic immunity enjoyed by Gilles de Rais served as an invisible shield against scrutiny. But how long can a community endure the fear of a powerful monster? Who would dare accuse a Marshal of France, the comrade of a saint, of such atrocious deeds? Yet as the number of missing youths grew, the silence in the Breton countryside transformed into a palpable dread. Parents and villagers began connecting the disappearances to the fortress walls, realizing the true nature of the monstrous hunger dwelling amongst them. The financial and moral collapse could not be contained indefinitely. How did a hero's relatives become the catalyst for his downfall? The relentless sale of his lands and titles drew the fierce opposition of his relatives, who sought to intervene legally to protect the remaining inheritance. This internal struggle provided the necessary opening for external accountability. The Duke of Brittany, Jean V, along with local ecclesiastical authorities, saw an opportunity and a necessity to intervene against the increasingly unstable and dangerous noble. In September 1440, the investigation reached its peak. How did the legendary Marshal of France finally get arrested? Gilles de Rais was apprehended by ducal forces, an event that sent shockwaves through the entire nobility of France. The charges were not merely financial, they were clerical and criminal, centered on heresy, sorcery, and the tragic fate of the young. He was taken to the formidable Château de Nantes to face not a simple secular court, but the uncompromising justice of Bishop Jean de Malestroit. The trial that followed was a spectacle of profound sorrow and confrontation, asking, can testimony truly break the illusion of noble immunity? The proceedings quickly unraveled the public facade of the hero, exposing the architect of extreme suffering. Testimony came from household staff, fearful associates like prelati, and, most agonizingly, the families of the condemned. These accounts painted a grim and consistent picture of the violations and the rituals conducted within the Marshal's fortresses. The sheer volume of evidence against him proved impossible to dismiss. Initially, Gilles de Rais maintained a fierce, almost arrogant denial, revealing the extent of his dangerous belief in his own power. He used his noble standing to challenge the authority of the bishop, even threatening to appeal to the Pope and the king, invoking the laws of chivalry. He saw the trial not as a confrontation with justice, but as a political assault on his inherited rights. This defiance revealed the depth of his belief in his own immunity, a conviction that had allowed the atrocities to flourish unchallenged for years. The relentless presentation of evidence and the constant pressure from the spiritual court began to erode his resolve, demonstrating how spiritual pressure can break a knight's iron will. The church used its full moral and spiritual authority to press for a full admission. Under these conditions, described by historians as intensely persuasive, the Marshal eventually yielded. His confession, delivered on October 21, 1440, was a devastating admission of guilt to the horrific deeds and the pursuit of forbidden indulgence. Kennedy was not a quiet, private moment. It was a public declaration intended to reinforce the moral authority of the Church and the secular power of the Duke. But was his confession forced or genuine? Some historical accounts suggest the possibility of coercion or spiritual manipulation. However, the fact remains that the confession detailed crimes so specific and numerous that they resonated with the local accounts of the missing youths. What came next changed everything for the French aristocracy. The court, satisfied with the Marshal's admission and the corroborating evidence, delivered its harsh verdict. How did the hero of France meet his final, tragic end? Gilles de Rais was guilty of heresy, sorcery, and the systematic violation of the vulnerable. His fall from grace was absolute. The man who had been the embodiment of French chivalry was now condemned to meet a tragic end by fire, a sentence reserved for the most heinous offenses against both God and man. Flooring on October 26, 1440, the day of his final hour dawned over naught. What was the Marshal's bizarre final request before his execution? The square was packed with onlookers. A morbid crowd gathered to witness the downfall of a titan. In a final, striking act of complex human contradiction, Gilles de Rais requested, and was granted, the right to attend Mass and make a public show of repentance. This moment, the convicted monster seeking spiritual absolution moments before his end, deepened the unsettling resonance of his story. The pyre itself became a powerful symbol, demonstrating how fire can symbolize the end of noble immunity. The very flames that consumed the body of the Marshal seemed to cleanse the kingdom of his terrible influence, but they also incinerated the illusion of noble immunity. The fire was the ultimate spectacle of accountability, a stark warning to any noble who believed their blood or fortune placed them beyond justice. The man who had sought to summon power from the shadows was reduced to ash in the light of day. The execution of Gilles de Rais rippled through the social fabric, sending a tremor of fear and introspection through the French elite, asking, how did one man's downfall change the entire aristocracy? The tragedy emphasized the fragility of life and reputation, demonstrating that even a figure of his stature could face the ultimate penalty. For the common people, it was a moment of terrifying validation. The monster in the castle was real, but he could be defeated. Despite the clear historical record of the trial and confession, the complexity of the case left lingering questions, shadows of doubt that persist to this day. Was the trial of Gilles de Rais a political conspiracy? Why was the trial so swift? Was the pursuit of his immense land holdings a factor in the Duke of Brittany's zeal? Some accounts suggest a political conspiracy aimed at seizing his territory, using his occult interests and financial ruin as the justification for his purge. The role of Francesco Prelati remains especially murky. How did the alleged alchemist avoid the Marshal's fate? Prelati confessed, implicating Gilles, yet he later received a comparatively lighter sentence, suggesting he may have been manipulated or strategically used by the court. The idea that a powerful nobleman was lured to ruin by an opportunist cleric only adds another layer of tragic irony to the narrative. It reminds us that in the pursuit of forbidden power, the most vulnerable currency is trust. Flooring de Rais's legend quickly transcended history, morphing into folklore, cementing his terrifying place in literary history. His deeds became the inspiration for the enduring European tale of Bluebeard, the wealthy, powerful nobleman who lures young victims to his castle where they meet their tragic end. This literary transformation ensured his infamy would persist for centuries, cementing his status as history's quintessential aristocratic monster. The story of the Marshal's descent serves as a perpetual case study on the corrosive nature of unchecked power, asking, what psychological toll does extreme wealth and trauma exact on a powerful hero? It is a terrifying chronicle of how trauma, wealth, and esoteric delusion can fuse to dismantle a man who was once a paragon of courage.
Historians and psychologists continue to examine his transformation, seeking to understand the psychological labyrinth that led a hero of France to commit such severe suffering. The most potent legacy of Gilles de Rais is the cautionary echo it sends across time, forcing us to confront the reality that nobility is but a fragile facade. The truth of power is always fragile. True virtue resides in action, not lineage. He stands as a stark warning against the human capacity for darkness when status and immunity shelter the worst impulses. The scandal ultimately triggered societal recalibration within the French aristocracy. How did the nobility try to cleanse itself after the marshal's atrocities? Many nobles, keen to distance themselves from the taint of the marshal's deeds, visibly increased their religious piety and tempered their own extravagant lifestyles. The belief that even a nobleman can lose his way became a quiet, chilling proverb echoing through the halls of power. This video is created for educational and historical purposes only, examining themes of power, corruption, and human conflict without depicting explicit or graphic events. The intention is to explore the historical record and the consequences of unchecked authority.
The shadow of the Marshal of France reminds us that the darkest chapters of history are often written not by external enemies, but by the internal collapse of the heroic spirit. If this story made you reflect on the fragility of power, stay with us for the next chapter as we continue our walk further into history's shadows.